Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/UFCW Canada.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. Thank you so much for being here for another week of provincial politics. The legislature back in session. Lots to discuss there, and a major reversal on another government drug policy. So we are going to jump right in it with our pod squad, Jeff Ferrier, Allie Blades, Jillian Oliver here each and every week to help you understand and make sense of the crazy mixed up world we live in these days, especially with BC politics, but also we cannot avoid American politics drifting its way into things like the throne speech, and we'll discuss that in a moment. First, I do want to start with safe supply. We have talked at length about drug policy on this program. Check out the archives. They are online, YouTube and podcast archives. This week, the government changed safe supply after 2 years of criticism, removing the unwitnessed allowance for safe supply, meaning those who were getting prescription opioids could take them away and use them at home, going to a witnessed model because of what it now admits are legitimate concerns that government drugs were being diverted into the hands of organized crime and resold and trafficked. So let's start there. We've talked about this in the past. It has been a question period issue. It has been a public discourse issue. It has been a police issue. There's been federal testimony from police chiefs. There's been on and on and on, Allie. Now the government's changing. What did you make of the timing, how they changed, and what they said when they were doing it?
I'm so glad you asked the question of timing, because that was the biggest question mark around this for me. If you take a look at the strategy of the NDP, it doesn't necessarily look like they have one this time around, which, as you referenced, the archives have actually been very complimentary of strategy and the communications that the NDP have previously put out. But I don't know if they had let go of their previous comms team and now there's a new batch of folks, because it's directionless. It's for what could have been a significant announcement immediately post the election, given that David Eby didn't necessarily have an overwhelming victory during the election. This could have changed public sentiment, or because of the public sentiment, it could have changed the perception of David Eby's leadership on this file, but he didn't do that in 2024. Instead, he did that immediately before they were set to debate it in question period. So that the timing is very suspicious to me. What it tells me is that this is going to be a session of reaction from the NDP versus them setting the tone of what their goals are. And we'll get into that with the throne speech. What this also tells me is that this is a great opportunity for the opposition to paint a picture of David Eby not necessarily doing anything in the past 5 months. And they did that actually in compliments of their comms shop in this really great video. And it had this sound or narrative from like a David Attenborough voice type. And it was David Eby coming out of hibernation. But that's exactly it. Like, where has he been? Has he thought about how he would react to these things in the last 5 months? Because 2 minutes before question period is certainly not an indication of leadership.
Mm-hmm. It seemed to me, Jeff will bring you in on this, but it seemed to me like, in addition to right before question period, the real kind of marker that changed this was the leak of the internal government document from internal investigators to RCMP, which happened a few weeks ago. The opposition conservatives got their hands on it. Eleanor Sturko put it out publicly that said diversion is happening in a significant amount, and it is leading to organized crime and trafficking provincially, nationally, and internationally. The minister referenced this report, which the government did not want out and complained that it was leaked, but then became the kind of core of the rationale for the decision that was made. And it left me wondering, Jeff, not to hit you with a barn burner of a question here, but it made me wonder if we would have, if we would have even seen this announcement from government, if that report hadn't leaked and kind of pushed this into the public discourse?
Yes, we would have. I think the genesis of this big shift in safe supply policy had nothing to do with opposition putting something out public, and absolutely everything to do with the government discovering the diversion, the bad faith action of pharmacies and their work with police to deal with it. I think the government is trying to balance two things here with its shift, which is significant. They want to continue to try and keep people safe from toxic street drugs while stopping prescription opioids from ending up on the streets. And the trade-off is that required supervision use makes it harder for some to stay in the program, especially people working or caring with families, which could push folks back into the illicit market, raising the risk instead of reducing it. So you have folks using the prescribed drugs now, start taking street drugs that are often filled with poison fentanyl and carfentanil, and it's a bad result. That's a tough part of drug policy. There's no easy answers, just hard choices with real consequences. And talking about David Eby and whether he's asleep or not, it's been interesting to see the start of the session and John Rustad hibernating on the issue of U.S. tariffs and the impact on British Columbia, which is probably the top of mind issue for voters right now.
Jillian, adding in another wrinkle here, you have a new health minister. And to be fair, I guess, to the sort of the timeline that Jeff was laying out there, the premier put in Josie Osborne's mandate letter reduced diversion. So you have maybe some political runway for a new minister, new eyes, new mandate letter. Jeff mentioned investigations going on behind the scenes, the session coming up, all these sort of dynamics coming together. How do you think they played a role in this decision?
Yeah, I definitely think the health minister, she was not the one that kickstarted the program. She's new coming in and looking at it. And I think the timing with this being the first week of session does indicate that, the government just decided that they didn't want to spend any more political capital on this issue. They don't want to, spend question period facing questions and then, only make this decision after, being appeared to have had even more pressure put on them to do it. But I also, it was really interesting to hear her interviews because it's obvious, like, she was adamant that the program saves lives. But when you listen to interviews from doctors, and I was listening to a good one from the former director of the CDC, Mark Tyndall, who helped, design some of these programs, he says that this effectively kills it. The reason for not having witnessed safe supply is that many people need to take it up to 4 or 5 times a day. And then there's also other people who, live in remote areas. Going to a pharmacy 4 or 5 times a day is just untenable for anyone, let alone if you're, trying to work or take care of a family or anything like that. So it was, I think that they have some more work to do around communications and around, like, what Allie said, like what their actual strategy is here, because right now it kind of sounds like they're trying to have it both ways to try to avoid the political criticism from some of the controversy, with the issue, as well as still, appearing to be treating this as a public health crisis and following the advice of doctors and public health officials. But, that's not actually what's happening.
It reminds me, that point exactly, Allie, reminds me of decriminalization, which is reduced back. But when you talk about it, government says it's still in place. Like, we're still not criminalizing people in their homes for using drugs, but also you can't use them in public, and having it both ways on that. Jeff, just to go back to you on this, is that a fair point, do you think? Is government trying to walk a line there to have it both ways on that?
For sure, it's a fair point. I don't think that they're making anyone happy on this. I think there's no winners in this. There's only losers, and that's the folks who are struggling with this and their families. They're trying to address real problems with diversion, which is on the public's mind. But in doing that, they risk, and they are getting pushback from harm reduction advocates who say this could push people back into toxic street drugs, which could have catastrophic effects on them. I think it was interesting to see how the Conservatives were on this, pushing for a public inquiry. And it's an interesting tactic. Certainly it's in their right to do so. But Every time I've seen a public inquiry, it's resulted in tens of millions of dollars, multiple years of study, often with no tangible result or action coming from it. So I think that's an unhelpful approach. I think there were strong conservatives in the legislature, and Elia Warbus probably being the most effective of them. I think it would be better if the BC Conservatives focused on specific changes or measures that they would like to see in the program, other than completely scrapping it, which would be unfortunate, instead of on this political grandstanding approach of calling for a public inquiry.
It feels like, Allie, part of the call for the public inquiry is a sense of wanting to go back and understand why government didn't admit these things were happening when they were being raised. A sense of talking to Eleanor Sturko, who got very emotional, first went up and congratulated Josie Osborne publicly in front of the cameras and shook her hand and said, "Thank you for doing this," right after the announcement was made. And then became emotional in the press conference, saying, "For 2 years, I have been bringing forward stories of this, and government called me a fearmonger and all these names and dismissed me." And it seems like that's where the public inquiry call seems to come from, is a desire to understand why government downplayed this for so long before now coming to that change.
Well, that's exactly it. The inquiry is not so much the policy or the expert opinion on this. Mind you, I think I read somewhere that there was no consultation with Bonnie Henry on this
Right.
one before
She
they
was
made the
away
decision.
on
As
vacation, I believe, but you're right. Yeah, she wasn't consulted. Yeah.
Fair enough. Things that could be pointed out in the public inquiry, mind you. But this isn't so much the policy, it is the logistics of the NDP operation that got to this point. The politics that everyone was trying to avoid, especially when it comes to sensitive topics like this. We often say that they shouldn't be partisan, it shouldn't be politicized. Well, here we are, where now we're starting to realize that this could have potentially been completely political decisions made in a time where the NDP had a lot to lose and still do post election as well. And so that's all this is at what point did you know that this was a problem? And how long did you hold on to information because it was politically advantageous for the NDP? And we deserve to know that.
Yeah. Jillian, then want to close us off on this? Anything come to mind on that? Feels like, the Greens are now the only party left, for example, advocating for the complete version of safe supply to continue, which I guess is both an opening and a different stance for them.
I think, yeah, I mean, we've just strayed so far from having like a fulsome conversation, I think, about the issue. I think what's really disappointing on the conservative side is like, yes, obviously this is an issue that is concerning to people when they hear about it. They don't talk at all about the evidence about how safe supply is helping people, that it reduces the use of street drugs, reduces the risk of overdose, reduces strain on emergency rooms, and increases opportunity for people to have engagement so that they can seek treatment and ultimately get off drugs entirely. They only are focusing on this one issue, which I think could have been addressed without scrapping the entire program. When you look at, the balance of saving lives, I think, it's disappointing that we're not having that conversation about the full scope of the program, that it's just sort of been politicized to the point that we're just kind of ripping it out so that the government can get on with other business. And yeah, the government doesn't seem like they have the appetite anymore to talk about that either.
Let's move on to the throne speech. You know my thoughts on throne speeches. I don't find them particularly useful. Jeff, I know you and I are in agreement on that, but let's just put that aside for a moment. This throne speech, war references, wartime, summoning our strength to kind of fight back against the Americans. What did you think of the throne speech?
I think I would prefer a shorter throne speech focused on the legislation that's going to be brought forward. But we don't live in that world. We live in a world where the speech is going to be a long speech. And in this speech, what I took away was the government's making it clear it's about the economy. and they're not waiting for the U.S. to play fair. They're focused with the rest of Canadian premiers and the Prime Minister on building a stronger, more self-reliant BC that can stand on its own. Really interesting article by former Prime Minister Stephen Harper in the National Post just recently, worth a read, makes the same point. I think the message is simple, and you referred to it. This is the biggest challenge to BC and Canada since the Second World War, and if we're going to deal with it, we need to rise up to meet the moment, as previous generations have done. I think EB is framing the situation we're in now as a fight for our sovereignty and economic future. That has the benefit of being absolutely correct. And, for British Columbians who are worried about their jobs, rising prices, the kind of future that's going to be there for their kids after all this, I think this is exactly the kind of leadership that they want to see right now. It's words now. The final judgment will be made on the actions taken, and that we'll see what comes of that.
Allie, what did you think?
That was a beautiful way to describe a bunch of nothing. But sorry, Jeff. Don't even take my word for it. Don't take my word for it. The Van Sun headline on this was a lot of repetitive words, little sign of immediate action. In Rob's article, he said there was a line of unflavored oatmeal reference or comparison as well. Like, this was
keeps you feeling full when you have it. It's fantastic.
It's true. It is healthier for you, but tastes bad. But yes, Allie.
It wasn't surprising that, of course, there was this extreme theme of Canadian pride, and that we will never be the 51st state, because it'd be weird not to include that right now. But where they potentially differ from the opposition is that in this, it's basically describing this economic war that in two election cycles that the NDP have been in government, that they haven't necessarily done anything to improve the economy. But now that, because we are under threat, that, well, they'll actually do it this time. And so they talk about investing in fast-tracking infrastructure. Do I need to say anything more about the Patola Bridge and the Massey Tunnel? They talk about making sure that they're reducing barriers to get things on track faster. When have I ever believed you that you're going to actually do this? But don't worry, this throne speech is actually going to be it. Take my word for it. Now, and then the opposition, hold on. In this theme that we're in this wartime and this economic war, typically in wars, the best narrative that could come out of it is a little bit of optimism. And this didn't have anything at all. I mean, if we're already going to go into massive debt, and shame on you, Jeff, for putting Harper against me here. But in this line that he says that we'll do everything it takes to protect our sovereignty. Well, if we're already going to be billions of dollars in debt, why don't we talk a little bit about optimism in investing in something like AI, or something that is uniquely BC, that we are positioned versus any other province to tackle these issues ahead of us. But that didn't really come across in this throne speech, because again, the NDP don't actually have a plan for this session. And then on the other side, for the opposition, they said that their plan would be more so, protecting our borders and stopping the fentanyl from crossing our borders. And I think that there's this really nice comparison of a reactionary NDP versus a more forward-thinking conservative. And this is very much aligned with the federal narrative that's happening as well. Pierre Poilievre had his Canada First rally over the weekend, where it was very thematic to that as well. So all in all, it was absolutely nothing. You wasted a day. Certainly a great opportunity for better headlines, but that didn't really happen.
Yeah. Jillian, what did you think?
I think we kind of did a foreshadowing episode. I think we're pretty close to.
You were the one who said put the speech into ChatGPT about a Canadian flag, and you were right.
Yeah,
it was very close to that.
Yeah, I hope that some staffers got to take the weekend off by using my suggestion. I think the throne speech it's like every government looks at it as just like a day of kind of like free press where they can just sort of like signal broad strokes where they're going. And so, I think that's fine. I mean, whatever. But I don't think there's any harm. It's so hard to break through the political noise right now. I actually, I understand that we're all kind of tired of the throne speech and we just want the list of bills like in Alberta, but I actually kind of think it's fine for the government to have a day to sort of telegraph its intent. I think on the strategy, I agree with Allie. I think the danger with this whole framing that the government is going with is that they are, potentially overshadowing the need to deal with all of the underlying crises that we already have by only focusing on this new crisis. And right now, we don't know what's going to happen. It could get much, much worse with the tariffs or, the whatever potential annexation, or things could kind of stay more or less the same. And we still are, mostly dealing with housing crisis, drug toxicity, all of those things that the government has kind of failed to show a lot of traction on so far. The other thing that I thought was so interesting is just like how difficult it is to sort of implement a cohesive political strategy right now. We ended the last election talking about how EB had gone too fast and done too much and, too many changes. And now we're talking about we need to go faster again and have more changes. So I think it's kind of like political whiplash. And I think for the PO, with that in mind, they're kind of trying to reset things to give themselves the renewed ability to reclaim that sort of man of action thing, which it seems like just yesterday we were talking about that. So I think that's kind of where we're at. Like it's, they sort of started their last year after they won the election, feeling like they had to slow down. Now they're feeling like they have to speed up again. And so they're sort of starting to reset that political narrative and give themselves the sort of runway to sort of get things done and maybe hopefully minimize the fallout from the implementation details that we always see when government tries to do things.
All right, good discussion. Thank you to the panel for being here. Thank you for listening. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube feed if you're watching us on CHEK Plus, and to the audio podcast. We've got lots of additional content we're talking about today. Thanks to Uber for sponsoring the show, and thank you for watching. We'll be back next week with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/UFCW Canada.